Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Richard W. Block. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Life as I Lived It, Small Town Country Living, available for purchase through Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but also the ebook format is available through Google. And I will say, Richard was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business. Author, Reputation Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, do yourself a favor and move it through ARP. You can find out more information on them at authorreputationpress.com. Now, without further ado, Richard, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, Benji, for asking.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Richard, we're very much looking forward to this, and I know we have so much information to cover. But before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Start by articulating to our listening audience a little bit more about yourself, please.
Well, let's see. I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Someone asked me that in an interview one time to tell me a little bit about myself, and that's what I said. And that killed the interview. They said, well, we can't improve on that, that's for sure. But it is a very interesting book. There's nothing bad in there. A child can read this book. It is very easy reading. My neighbor has a copy of it, and he told me he's read it through from cover to cover 3 times already. Wow. He said he just enjoyed sitting down and reading a story at random. He never gets tired of the stories. Was looking forward to my next book, which I haven't given it to him yet, but I'm sure he'll be doing the same thing with it. I have several titles. It's Colonel. It's Sir Richard. It's Lord Richard. It just depends on where I'm at. I'm a master of a little bit of everything. You know what they say, a jack of all trades and master of none. Well, I'm a master of most. I worked for a McDonald's franchise here in Cincinnati worked for the man for 40 years. I took care of everything from the rooftop to the blacktop and 42 McDonald's that he owned. Wow. And so I learned how to do everything. And what I couldn't do myself, I would contract out. So that's some of the things that I do myself. I used to tell my wife all the time, if I couldn't do this or fix this, I wouldn't know who to call, you know.
Fantastic. You know, Richard, let's go more in depth with the books. I know you already started to briefly touch up on it in terms of the collection of stories and really the impact that it has had on your neighbor. So let's go more in depth. Life as I Lived It. Collection of, I think you said it was 122 short stories. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, what do the stories themselves entail? And then leading into inspiration, why did you feel compelled to comprise this narrative?
Well, one of the things that I do is I work for the Department of Natural Resources here in Ohio, Department of Wildlife. And I do hunter safety programs, and I would tell stories during the lessons and the presentations there, training the people how to handle guns safely. I would tell them stories that would help them remember answers when they would get to the 100-question test that you'd have to pass at the end. You'd have to get 80% of the questions correct to pass the hunter safety course. But after a while, I got to thinking, you know, I ought to write some of these stories down. You know, I tell a lot of good stories, and a lot of times during a test, I tell them if they have a question, just raise your hand. And sometimes they'll raise their hand and they'll ask about a question. And I'll say, well, you remember the story about this or that? And it helps them answer the question and pass the test. And so I used to spend a lot of time traveling from Cincinnati to the Florida Keys back and forth on a job. And I had a lot of time in travel to actually sit down and write while someone else was driving. And so I would hand write them, and my wife would take and type them all up. And then we'd put them on a computer and put them in a file. And it took me about 10 years to write the first book, but it only took me about 3 months to write the second one, just compiling stories.
Fantastic. Now, it sounds like this is something that, again, was birthed out of how well people took to the stories in which you were telling. Yes?
Yes, that's for sure.
You know, I'm curious. Now, sure, there's 122 stories, so obviously there's a lot to go in there. Do you have a favorite little story that that you've incorporated into your book?
Oh, I don't know. They're all kind of favorites, I guess you could say. I can tell you one story there where I was repairing a car that I had bought, and it needed a full front end on it, and I had a front bumper left over, and so we couldn't decide what to do with this bumper. And a friend of mine and I, we decided that we'd take the bumper down and throw it in the creek off of a bridge. The phone company had dumped a whole bunch of stuff in there, and I thought, well, we'll just take it down there and throw it in the creek, which is not the great thing to do. But on a Saturday night, Fridays and Saturday nights, actually, people would be down there on the creek fishing, and all their lanterns would be up and down the bank there, sitting there fishing. And so we loaded the bumper in the back of a pickup truck, and we drove out and stopped at the middle of the bridge. And we got out of the truck and put on this mock fight, slapping each other around and banging around and hooping and hollering and stuff. And then we grabbed the bumper and we threw it off the bridge, and it made a big splash down there. And I yelled, well, that'll teach him to mess around with my girlfriend. And then we jumped in the truck and drove off. And all the people were grabbing their fishing poles and winding in the lines and their lanterns and running for their cars. They didn't want to be any part of it. They thought maybe we'd killed somebody, But we got to laughing about it. We thought we ought to come back tomorrow and see if they're dragging the creek. But nothing ever happened of it, I suppose.
All right. Well, that was definitely a different way. I was not expecting the story to go. That is fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I love that. As I stated when we first started, right? The stories are so unique, and that is something that even though my friends and I, we never did anything along those lines, but what I can relate to is it makes me think back to experiences that I had growing up and experiences that I did with some of my friends and things that were very funny in the moment. And it just relates, the relatability factor with your book and with your short stories, I think is really where so much of the power lies. Now, next concept that I want to get into and I want to ask about, Richard, you specifically wrote these short stories, right? And as you stated in the pre-screening call, created really for people on the go, right? You don't have to sit and read it in totality in one sitting. Now, why did you specifically go into it with that intent, knowing that this was a book that you wanted to comprise with these short stories? I mean, I know your inspiration behind writing short stories or telling short stories, but why did you put the book together that way? Because I'm sure any one of these stories could have been elaborated and developed into a more lengthy narrative.
Well, one thought that I had is it's almost like a biography that my children and grandchildren can read, and they say, well, that's what Dad or Grandpa was like when he grew up. This is some of the things that he did, Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a legacy, I guess you could say, in a word that I don't know. It just, a lot of people would feel the same way if they did the same thing. It's like writing down things that they did and for other people to read. And of course, it's meant to bring back memories. And every reader that's reading it, there's something in that book, no matter who you are or where you're from, is going to touch you about your growing up somewhere in your lifetime and bring back memories, fond memories, hopefully, that that you can share with friends. When my book first came out, I gave a copy to the library there in Aurora. I have a friend that works at the library. He's a historian. He read the whole book in one night. He couldn't put it down. Wow. And then I've had other people, I asked them from time to time, what was your favorite story? And they would talk about this or that. And a friend of mine said he had to put the book down 3 times. He couldn't get through the one story because he got to laughing so hard that he just couldn't do it. And so it took him 3 times just to get the whole story read in one of them.
Guys, again, here on the line with Richard W. Block. We're discussing his fantastic book, Life as I Lived It, Small Town Country Living, available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or in ebook format through Google. Now, Richard, I want to slightly transition to the next book because there is a second book that you've written. It's almost a continuation of Life as I Lived It. Now, that book is called Coffee with Jesus. Now, first and foremost, before we even go into a description of the book itself, I am fascinated by that title. Talk to me, why did you choose that title to be the representation for your second book?
I have my grandson over. You know how kids are. They know how to work the computers, and I am not computer illiterate, but at any rate, we got to tossing back and forth about what kind of a title can we give this book. And so I came up with the Coffee with Jesus. I thought, well, it has a beautiful cover that they selected for me and everything. And I thought it will spark the interest of people just browsing through the shelves. Oh, gee, here's a book here. But it is actually a continuation of the first book. There's 106 stories in it. They're all true short stories, easy reading, nothing bad. Child can read it. And it actually has nothing to do with Jesus. There's a disclaimer on the inside the book there, one of the first pages, that says that this book actually has nothing to do with Jesus, but it has everything to do with the world that his Father created for us. And that is the gist of that.
Fantastic. Well, now that makes sense in terms of the connection with the title there, because I was really curious. As you stated, it absolutely is enticing. You hear that title, it intrigues you. It really makes you want to look further in. And then when you find out that it doesn't really have anything to do with Jesus, it almost increases the interest even more because, again, it's so unique. And now we know where the title comes from. So thank you for articulating that. Now, Richard, as we start to tie up this fantastic interview, I love having this platform. I mean, I'm an artist myself, based here in California, different medium. I'm an actor and a filmmaker here. But, of course, everyone knows my father, Al Cole. I come from a family of artists. And being able to have this platform to pay it forward, in a sense, to other artists out there listening in is something that I love having the opportunity to do. Now, you're someone that has written 2 books. You've comprised the stories yourself, but you've also gone through the gauntlet of getting it published, which anybody that has been through the process understands writing the book is only half the battle. So I'd love to pick your brain a bit and find any words of wisdom that you'll be able to offer a new writer that's listening into our network right now, someone just starting out. What would you be able to tell them about the writing process that they should expect?
One thing is you need to proofread it. Several times you need to proofread it.
Absolutely.
I use a computer now. I have this Dragon program that I use where I just dictate into a microphone and it writes it down. But you have to really proofread it because a computer is not perfect. They tend to screw me over every time that they get the chance to put it in that form. Let's take the word for instance. You can have FOR, FOUR, FORE, or the number 4. And the computer just puts down what it wants. You know, you said 4, it puts down a 4. So you have to go back and you have to go over that because the computer will put down what it thinks it hears, whether it's right or not. And so you have to really stay on top of going over it and see if it's politically correct. Another thing is when you write a book, there's a lot of things you have to do that you don't realize, and that is you have to pick the type of paper that you want it printed on. You have to pick the font, the size of the font or the lettering, how many words per page that you want, how many pages are going to go in the book, what kind of cover you want on there, if you're going to put pictures in it or not. So there's a lot of things you have to do to put in the book. You have to put in something about yourself. So about the author, naturally, so that you can see what kind of a person wrote that book. But there is a lot of things that you don't realize. And then, of course, there's advertising, there's publishers. And you see on television, even nowadays, all these advertisements. Have you written a book? You know, we can publish your book. Or have you written a religious book? We can publish your book. And, you know, I have all these people out there, these publishers that are looking for people that have written books. And the thing about the books is most books are novels. My books are books of short stories. They're all true stories, and they're in big demand. Books that you don't have to get worn out reading the thing and spend weeks reading a novel from cover to cover. You can just pick it up, read a story in 3 to 5 minutes, and you've got it, you know.
I love that answer that you gave. And really, I love asking that question, right? We primarily focus with authors here on our network, People of Distinction. And that question, the answers that I've received, they're always so unique. And it really just highlights the different things that you have to think about when you're wanting to write your book, when you're wanting to publish the book. As I stated, writing the book is only half the battle. Getting it through publication, editing is its own endeavor, right? Having multiple eyes look at it, reviewing it over and over, because a lot of times the smallest things may go unnoticed. They may go undetected. So I'm glad that you brought that up. A new one that I haven't heard, which makes perfect sense, is knowing the type of paper you're printing it on, right? The number of words per page, all of these things in terms of just the design for publication matters, because it also plays into how your book is going to, how it's going to look, how it's going to be sold. There's so much more that goes into it. It's not just, I've written the book, now it's time to put it out there, right? So thank you for explaining a lot of the intricacies that will be found really when you're going through that process. You know, Richard, last thing, we've talked about both of your books. We've gone into one of the stories that you have put in there. Is there anything else that you would like to articulate to our listening audience about either one of your books that we haven't yet discovered?
Yes. One thing is that when you write a story and you involve someone else, you have to be careful as far as the name. You can either change the name of a person or not give their whole name, depending on whether they're dead or alive. If a person is passed on, I'll use their whole name. If they're not, I will just use their first name and maybe an initial of their last name. But you don't want to step on anybody's toes and put yourself in position to be sued, let's say, by someone who didn't want their name in the book. So you have to be careful not to put things like that in there that is going to actually point someone out. One thing that we didn't talk about was personal autographing of the books. I like to go to a lot of different places, and I'm invited a lot of the times to come to different carnivals and gun shows and just different occasions where I can set up and sell my books. And I sell them and autograph them. And when a person comes up and buys one of my books after they pay me for it and they're ready to leave, I tell them, I said, now, I want to tell you that this is the only book you'll ever buy that has a warranty. And, of course, I get this puzzled look like, what do you mean? And I say, now, what this warranty entails is if you read this book and you're not really happy with it, you bring it back to me, and I will personally give you an attitude adjustment, and you'll love this book by the time you leave this time.
Guys, listen, what more can be said? Okay, well, let me stop. Let me correct that. A lot more can be said, okay? We've discussed one story out of the 122 that are available in this book, and then we've also discussed Coffee with Jesus, which has over another 100 short stories. So much more can be discussed. Nothing more is going to be discussed here today on our network. The onus is now up to you. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, e-format through Google are the places you have to go. Life as I Lived It, Small Town Country Living, and Coffee with Jesus are the books you have to get And Richard W. Block is the author you have to thank for bringing it to your table. I know for me, as I stated when I started, this is a great journey to embark upon. Because listen, after the year that we just had, I am yearning for something to help me transition out of the confines of the walls that I've found myself stuck in for the past year. For you, it may be something different, light-hearted reading that you can easily pick up at any moment, just to leisurely pass the time. Great stories for you to go over with your children, an even better gift for you to get for somebody else's. You know what you have to do. You surely will not be disappointed. Let's bask in the glory that is this book, or these books, rather. And also, while you're reading them, allow it to really bring you back to an earlier time, a more pleasant time through these stories, because the connections are there. The relatability is so powerful. Richard, thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. It was an absolute honor.
Well, I was very happy to talk to you, and you have a very soothing voice here. I'm trying to stay awake while you're interviewing me.